Hello, everybody. Here we are. We're back on the show. Evan Abrams coming to you with the Motion Design Hotline, joined, as usual, by my co-host, my Quixotic co-host, Kyle Hamrick. Those are almost...
Oh, that's me.
Yeah. Oh, geez. Those are almost similar sounds, right?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Quo-host.
Yes. Folks, if you've never been here before, we are here to answer your motion design troubles. We're here to fix things for you. We're here to make things right. And we do that by soliciting questions from you. There's a link in the description you can use, so you can send us more long-form questions. But if you have a question with anything you see us doing during this program, please let us know in the chat. Get at us in the chats. Get at us on YouTube. Get at us on Behance. Come from YouTube and join us on Behance. And ask us questions. I don't know, Kyle, anything you need to tell the people this morning?
I guess... We could give them the form if they want to give us those longer form questions. Smaller things, drop them in the chat. We'll do our best to answer them as they happen. And then more involved things, we have a handy dandy form that you can fill out where you can actually explain things in more than a sentence and a half.
Right. Well, if it takes us more than a sentence and a half to answer them, you win a prize.
It's not worth covering.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to thank everyone for noticing my beautiful shirt. We are, of course, representing the duality of man today on the show. But also want to say hello to Oliver. Hey, Voodoo Val, hanging out with us. Great to see Katarina. Great to see Gareth Williams hanging out with us. So many lovely people being with us.
I see Anne over on YouTube.
Oh.
Hi, Anne.
Hello. Yes, we're in both places. But I mention these people because we have a question from a very special person who sent a question to us. Kyle, shall I read it to the people?
Oh, please do.
Okay, good. Well, let's look at Evan's screen. There we go. And while I open up the mail, mailbox. Here we go. Actually, you know what? I'm going to use the Evan solo screen. There we go. So, your motion design hotline, how they did it videos are extremely helpful for beginners like me. Doesn't that sound great? I've recently been given a task to explain really complex technical subject matter, making it more accessible and understandable for general non-engineer audience. And they would like to use a style of cutout collage using abstract geometric shapes and photos. Kyle, are you familiar with this type of thing?
I'm quite familiar because I built an example for this show, but also I've done it several times for clients and personal work and so on and so forth.
Well, good.
Short answer, yes.
Yeah. So I'm going to just jump over my screen real quick here. And here is kind of the example that they had sent over. You see a lot of geometries, a lot of textures, a lot of shapes, kind of a sort of a more staccato type of movement to things. Things are not particularly very fluid here. And, that is the point, right? We are reducing the frame rate. We are making things a little bit janky, a little bit bouncing around, and that frees us up to make things that are a little bit more discordant with each other. So things don't have to harmonize because the point of it is to not harmonize. So
I've always thought it's a little bit of kind of an attempt to emulate the way that this would have worked if you were, creating with stop motion with physical objects.
Right.
And it's just kind of the way that this particular style of animation has evolved.
Yeah, it's got that kind of Terry Gilliam vibe.
Yep.
Cut things out of magazines, physically move them around. So, Kyle, you teased that you had an example for us to enjoy. We might as well cut to that. I've got some stuff for us to look at, but okay. Kyle, you've got something for us to jump into.
Yeah. So I'll go ahead and just show this big to start out here. This is the example that I built. As you got a little peek a second ago there, we have a Millinote board that we kind of worked through who was going to cover what techniques. And so I kind of tried to cram as many of the things that were left on the list into one example as I could. So you'll see that we have this composition is 24 frames a second, but I don't think hardly anything in here is running at that frame rate. Several elements are running at different frame rates. We have a piece of footage that's been kind of very reduced to only a handful of frames, and then kind of rotoscoped. We have some photographic elements that have been kind of rebuilt from a couple different pieces. We have some very kind of chunky text animation here. We have some actual the circle in the center there. I cut it out of real paper and did the tears myself,
Whoa.
so that I'd have some control over that.
Arts and crafts time here on the program.
Yeah, well, I thought that would be a good example of how sometimes it's better to just do that, and it took me 2 minutes. So and a whole lot of textures all over the place here. So
right.
We can kind of dig into this as much as we want. Maybe I'll give the brief version, and then we'll take a look at some of Evan's examples and maybe kind of bounce back and forth as we're kind of touching on similar ideas here.
Yeah, and of course, people, if there's something that you want us to focus on, good people of the chat, let us know. We'll zoom right in there. It's your show as much as it's our show. And of course, Justin Winslow saying nice horse animation. I don't know.
Yeah, well, what if we, that's the thing. I was gonna say it's not so much an animation.
Well, maybe we start with that element, because if someone calls it out, we must look at it.
I agree. So we caught this in that example piece that was referenced. Where there were a couple places where there was just a very, very low frame rate instance that looked like it was probably cut from a piece of footage. And so I grabbed all my elements from for this piece off of Adobe stock. And this is actually the clip that there we go. This is actually the clip that I used to create that horse animation. Yeah, not the most ideal clip for having a cutout horse here, right? But I also kind of wanted to hit an example of, like, a lot of times with this style, you can kind of take advantage of the stylized nature of it to spruce up something that may not quite be as ideal as you want.
Right. You're not going to use any of the detail of the horse. It doesn't need to be particularly sized right, because it's going to be totally out of context.
Exactly. So I just grabbed a handful of frames from that piece of footage, and then I kind of manually lined them up on top of one another, using mostly let's turn off these effects here. One of my favorite things to do when I'm matching stuff up, I'm just going to drag this last one out here so that it exists under all of them. And then I really like to use the difference blending mode, because then you can see where things are actually positioned on top of one another. And so using that, I kind of got all these matched up as well as I could here. And then had myself this lovely, let me trim that back to where it was. This lovely, like, very low frame rate version of this horse galloping.
Right. And so right now, it's like it's just galloping in place on a treadmill, right? So it's not
exactly.
It's not getting anywhere. It's not getting away from you. So I think maybe this is one of the things that gets overlooked a lot, is if we want to get control over it, you got to stop the thing from moving first.
Exactly. And that's exactly what I did here. This is just 6 frames. And so it was easy enough to kind of manually mask this off. But if it were a little bit more complex thing, stabilizing it, which I actually tried to do on this, and the stabilizer didn't quite get me there, but you could try that. Let me see, it's right up here, Warp Stabilizer VFX. You could try that and see if that could crunch your footage to the point that it's actually not moving, and you can, like, isolate your object and maybe use the roto brush there. In my case, I just kind of crunched the heck out of it with a few effects here. I just inverted it and cranked the levels up, because I figured the look of this was such that a silhouette was probably the best I was going to get out of this. So that's what it is here. It's just kind of filled and then has a texture laid over it. So there's that.
Perfect.
Let's maybe the windmill real quick be an interesting thing to dive into.
Oh, well, I was going to say, Kyle, you brought a horse. Now I think I should show my horse.
Please do. This is our little tennis match.
That's
here.
Right. Welcome to Motion Design Hotline. Well, where it's all about the love, I guess. There's a bit of tennis humor for anyone who cares. Okay, so for me, I wanted to animate using what we call the paper doll use. So if we come here, we've got a horsey, right? And I've got the horsey's legs just wonderfully galloping forward, right? So that you can see that they hinge here, if we get to enjoy Turn on the background, you can see, yep, those are some wonderfully hinging horsey legs.
Yeah, love it.
Perfectly done. If we roll back one, let's just roll back one sort of layer of fidelity on this thing. And we look at these horsey's legs again. This is without the knee hinge at all. Doesn't look quite as good. It's actually a little bit funnier. So if you're thinking about animating for comedy, sometimes a lower fidelity is better. But the challenge, the real challenge with this stuff is isolating these elements from each other, and so that we can actually move them over top of each other. To show you a little bit about what we're talking about here, I'm going to jump into Photoshop where this type of work actually begins. And the original is this kind of Creative Commons photo of Don Quixote and Sancho Panza. They're having a good time. They're out there. They're looking for some windmills to get at. And if we wanted to animate this creature's legs, right now it's mid-prance. And so what we've got to do is not only isolate these legs so they can move independently, which we could do with masking. We can just paint them out in here. But we then have to make up what is behind. So the easier one to do is sort of the top one, right? Now this we can, if you just need to make that happen here, I'll drag the original here. Let me just show you how we would kind of start it from scratch, right? So we've got our original. I'm going to delete this layer mask. And what you do is you could just select the subject. So we could go, say, select subject, and After Effects will attempt to select the subject. And then
usually pretty well. I love that command. If you're not using it, please start.
Yeah. And well, I'll just show you kind of the layer mask results here. It did a pretty good job. I'd say it did an okay job. And it has created a mask. You can see the black and white values over here. And then we can just take our brush and with the mask selected, start painting away everything that we don't want. And truth be told, this is how I usually do it, is that I do a lot of kind of manual painting, try to get myself as close as possible with things, especially because I have a tablet here so I can brush in real close. The end result is going to be something a little bit like this. So you're going to end up with this leg. Now, if you do the same thing and isolate the back leg, that's going to be okay, but then you're going to need to basically in-paint on this. Now, due to several advances in technology, an ancient one that I like to use is the clone stamp tool. You could use the healing brush. You could use all kinds of things, but clone stamp, especially on something that is as sort of abstracted here, this kind of, we'd say more like a woodcut type of thing, right? It's easier to sort of sample part of the thigh up here and making sure that you have the image itself selected. We can sort of take parts of that texture and say, put it in somewhere else. And that can help you kind of build in what is missing. On more photorealistic things, this is of course a lot harder because it has to match more exactly, but thanks to the looseness of our style, we actually don't care that about it, right? So with all of our component parts, I'll show you the parts that I required. One back leg of horse, one front leg of horse, and one horse with no legs. So that is that's a horrifying thing to encounter.
Yeah, this is like things you're putting into a witch's cauldron. It's a little too samey.
Yeah, that's true. So anyway, that gives us all of the component parts we need because we have the front leg of the horse isolated, we have the back leg of the horse isolated and in-painted, and then we have, in this case, sort of the body of the horse isolated, and then I did no in-painting because I was feeling a little bit lazy with that. So when we move it over here to After Effects, here's our foreleg, right? And the foreleg, as you can see, has simply been rotated. So if we tap UU to bring up all the things I've changed about it, I've just moved the anchor point. You can use the old pan behind tool to move your anchor points around. And then we pick right in the middle of the joint and start it rotating so that it can rotate around. Now, I would say, Evan, this is not particularly good. Horses' legs do not bend this way. As silly as it may be. What if we want to get a little bit more fidelity with it? We've already touched Photoshop enough. We've had enough of that. Stop hurting us with Photoshop. What we can do is we can carve things apart here in After Effects as well. So let me just change this layer to something, maybe like orange will be a little bit easier for us to kind of see what's going on. I'm going to change the mask path here to also be a nice bright color so that we can really kind of enjoy what's happening. And I need to separate this joint basically in half. So let's call this foreleg, and we'll call this one hooves. So you can just Command D, duplicate your object. And on hooves here, I'm just going to shrink this mask kind of to delineate right here at the knee. That'll work out nicely. And on this other one, I'm going to just go ahead and shrink this up to the knee right around there. So with this one that is for hooves, I'm going to move the anchor point of that to live in the kind of the middle center of the knee. And I'm going to parent, very important, parent the lower leg part to the upper leg part. And we will see that that is indeed terrifying. So I'm going to just change the angles on these so that it is cranking back a little bit here. And then instead of sort of flying forward, I will select both of those keyframes and then drag them to be a little bit more like this. So now you can see that we are sort of pawing at the ground when this goes. Now, we don't see a lot of tearing, right? Because these two objects actually intersect with each other fairly cleanly. But I'm going to recommend that if you are seeing bits of joint kind of poke out, like if these are not marrying together quite nicely, just
go directly to the hospital.
Yes, exactly. Well, step one, go to a vet. Step two, draw a mask on this thing, starting at that joint, holding down Shift, and you will draw a circle. So now we've got a nice circle here like this. And now I will go to the other one, and I'm going to take that mask, copy it, and paste it, kablunk, like that. So now there is a common circle that overlaps between both of those. Because of the way horses are, and their joints not being particularly clean for this sort of thing, you'd have to kind of massage this a little bit. But the idea is you want a patch that overlaps between the two, so you never see the seams. Nay, terrifying indeed, Gareth. Wonderful, wonderful. So with that in mind, right, this leads me to the kind of hinged legs of the horse. And before we move on, I know we've got a horsey and we have a windmill we need to tilt at. I want to talk a little bit about the particular timing of the animation here. So if I were to say line all of these keyframes up, we're going to line them up so they all happen exactly at the same time. It's okay, we would say. This is still pretty robotic, right? I've got the legs, and we are using an expression, the loop out expression down here, loop out, and then parentheses, and that will simply cycle the animation through. And with that on these things, that means those cycles are going to keep happening, ka-clump, ka-clump, ka-clump. And these are spanned out 20 frames in between. So 20 frames from here to back again. So that's what's happening with the thigh, the foreleg, the back thigh, the back foreleg. We have a little bit of rotation on the body, and those legs are, of course, parented to the body, as legs are. And this goes every 10 frames, so it is just gently pitching forward and backwards. So with these cycles, these periods worked out, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the forelegs and I'm going to offset them so that they are happening sort of at the halfway point. So now it's more like they're pawing. And because we have the loop out on them, it's pretty easy to actually slide this back and forth and really kind of find where you want that to be. And then to take the other element here, the body's rocking back and forth, and kind of shift that until we get where we want. So this is a great way to set up loops, shift them back and forth, and get them exactly how we want. Now, of course, when it comes to making use of them, I'm going to show you the paper doll in use. We have here a little colorizing of this bad boy, so that we are using just a simple levels and then a tritone. So the levels to give us a little bit of command over the black and white values, and then tritone to harmonize it with the rest of our piece, because of course we must apply same ideas to different elements. Kyle, it's time to rally it back to you. I see you goading me in the chat here about about a windmill, perhaps. Talk to me about that. What are we getting into next?
Well, I love that horse example. It's obviously a bit more complicated than my windmill, but a lot of very similar ideas. So I think it's kind of a good handoff here for some of the things that I'm about to show.
It's what we call a natural segue on the program.
Definitely planned perfectly.
We plan everything about these shows. They're meticulous, down to the second type of things. We are here, of course, at the kind of third mark of the program, and we've already done two things, so we're nailing it.
Yeah, perfect. You know, a windmill seemed like a pretty crucial component of this animation, right? And so I just have a windmill created in its own little pre-comp here. And that came from, where is my, a few of my images here, again, just from Adobe stock. I felt like this was a good hero windmill, but these blades were not going to do what I needed them to do,
or
right?
perhaps
so it's probably going to have to
maybe villain windmill.
Yeah, there you go. I was going to have to steal some blades from another windmill. I probably could have adapted this, but that would have been too hard to cut out. So I think this one. I stole the blade from this one because that was a nice clean cutout. So let's hop over to Photoshop here. Here is my original. I started out by doing select subject, just like Evan did. Not that one. Well, I guess this was when I then manually painted off the blades here, right? So I could really get that outline. But this isn't going to work if I have all of this, right? So that's when I used content aware fill and some manual painting to actually get like a clean version of the windmill without the blades in front of it, which wasn't too bad because these are all pretty much straight lines. So it's not too hard to just kind of use, you know, the polygonal lasso tool to kind of get those chunks and then let content aware fill do most of the work. A little bit of cleanup.
I was going to say, would you mind for those people who do not know, maybe fill in one of those? Just give us a
totally
give us a taste.
So exactly. So just as an example, I'll just do kind of a little piece here. I won't get into the window because that requires a little more attention. So I'm just kind of grabbing some segments here. I'm holding shift so that I can select multiple things at once. And, you know, this takes a little bit of manual work, but not too much. And I don't have to be super perfect here. Let me get maybe like one more piece. I think this area is going to clone itself out pretty well. So you can see I kind of have that area selected here. And then I could go up to edit, somewhere, content aware fill. And then it's already kind of guessing at what I want to do with that area. You know, in this case, for this example, like, yeah, that's pretty good. So I could go ahead and say, okay, or I could tell it to apply. And then in here, you can actually sample different parts of the image if you want. So I just did that a few times. And then, well, here, I'll go ahead and let that one process and then kind of show you that next step. Maybe there's some bits in here. There we go, where I needed to maybe grab the healing brush like Evan was referencing and kind of just touch these little, hang on, this may be sampling other layers and stuff for me.
But yeah, well, while you sort that out, I did want to say, notice everyone, how Kyle is doing a small patch of the element and not attempting to do all of it at the same time. It is.
Yeah.
I think that's maybe where I think people fall down the most, trying to leverage a lot of these tools when you're asking it to sample a way larger spot. I tried to use content aware fill to remove the Sancho and Don Quixote from the woodcut, right? And that covers a big swathe of totally different textures behind them, and it turned into a mess, right? And that makes sense because we're sampling too much and we're replacing too much.
And so like here, it just clone stamping all this out might be a viable approach too. You can see here the colors shifting. So like clone stamp isn't great. You might want healing brush, but healing brush probably wouldn't work well if you still had the object underneath. So honestly, for a lot of things like this, I would typically, I think I did one blade at a time, but I did the roof separate from the parts over the white. You know, just kind of don't ask it to do too much at once, and it will usually be really nice to you. And, you know, also you can see this has imperfections, but the final thing wasn't going to be that big. So this is okay, right? I mean, this is about what it looks like in the thing. So you can see some pretty nasty pieces in the roof and all that. And then, you know, sometimes you'll find there's details that just don't get picked up there. So I just grabbed a copy of this window and kind of brought it over here, did a little bit of very quick warping to make it look good enough, right? And then we have the body of a windmill.
That's right.
And
Motion
then,
design hotline. Make it look good enough.
Make it look good enough. I mean, I often tell people a lot of motion graphics, motion design, whatever you want to call this stuff, is knowing what you can get away with. And especially if you're dropping a lot of textures on top of something, it's popping around a lot, you probably get away with quite a bit.
Yeah.
So, I had my nice clean windmill here. I need a blade. I don't need 4 separate blades. I just need one, and then I'll make 4 copies of it. So this was a pretty clean cutout, and I just kind of cropped that down so it'd be a little easier to work with, right? And then back in After Effects here, I had a little bit of style just for the body of the windmill, and then these blades are actually there's 4 instances of that, and I turned them into 3D objects, connected them to a null object, so I could kind of rotate all of them, in one place here, because they aren't straight at us; they're just a little bit offset. And then rather than keyframing the actual rotation, I used a very simple expression called time. And so I took time, which is the actual time of this composition, times 30. And it just keeps that Z rotation spinning forever, whether this is 5 seconds long or, an hour long.
Constantly trying to do less work. That's what we're here for.
Exactly. Well, I mean, sometimes that's this sort of thing for a constant movement like that. It's a little easier to adjust than tweaking keyframes a whole bunch. Like if I want it to go faster, I could just change the multiplier there.
Absolutely. So let that be a lesson to everyone out there. And of course, people out there, if you have any quandaries, let us know. If we're going too fast, skipping things you wish we would focus in on, let us know. We have, I'll be honest, a lot of material to get through.
Yeah. So anything that you want us to drill into, please say so. What feels like the best sort of volley back to you?
Well, I see some smooth motion with the windmill. I think it's time to posterize some things. So posterization, I used to say posterization because I thought it was being funny. Anyway, the internet told me to stop doing that. So posterization is just clumping similar things together. We might say quantization. So if you're coming from Cinema 4D or other sort of animation, principles, when we quantize, or I guess math, we are we're grouping things together. So it's the same type of thing. And usually you would see it done when we take something, we make it more like a poster, as in reducing the number of colors. So that's where our nomenclature is coming from and going to. I hope any of that made sense. But we're going to get into my screen here and let us enjoy folder number 2, time posterizations. So here is what I would describe as a very nice animation. We've got a circle. It breaks up into 4 things. They turn into pie wedges and they pop up, right? Very smooth. 30 frames per second. We're getting all of them. We're enjoying each and every one of those frames, and they're great. Now, if we wanted this to feel a little more down home, a little bit more handmade, well, then we can, mess with the edges. We can roughen this thing up, but we can also mess with the time. So I have here a wonderful adjustment layer, and it goes layer, new adjustment layer that will adjust everything under it. If we have a little look at that, we have applied the Posterize Time. You can find that if you search up Posterize Time. It is in the Time family of effects. They're all waiting for you to enjoy them. So Posterize Time, you just pick a new frame rate out of this. So with Posterize Time, if we just left this at 30, we would notice no change. If we started to dial this down to, say, 24, we're going to see a bit of a change. 24 is different than 30. To see even more change, let's go down to 4. Let's take it down to 4. Beep, bop, bop, boop. Beep, bop, boop, beep, boop, boop. So this is already working out pretty well. You could go from 4 up to 8, perhaps. See how we feel about 8. I feel like we're losing a lot of information. I would go maybe to 15. But everything under this adjustment layer, we're basically saying, hey, let's only see some of the frames, right? And it's adjusting. So every so often, we're going to lose some frames. We're just going to hold. We are posterizing time. This is the most basic way that you'll see this done, is simply applying Posterize Time as an adjustment layer over top of an already smooth animation. It's going to look great. Well, it'll look posterized. I shouldn't make those promises, Kyle.
Great if that's what you want.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It'll look similar to things. But if you have, say, multiple sources out here, multiple horses, multiple sources, and one of them is at 8, the other one, is at 30. If you just posterize everything down to a common denominator, it's going to make things appear a lot more harmonized and intentional, I guess is the idea. It's a stylus.
I'm glad you brought that up. Like if you are posterizing things, don't have, a 24 frame per second comp with something posterized to 5 and something else posterized to 17 or whatever, because that's probably going to feel off.
Yeah.
But if you use 12 and 8 and 4, those are all going to feel like they belong together, even though they are actually different frame rates.
Yeah, and it's how to say, factors, I guess, is what we're looking at, right? They're divisible. They have common denominators amongst them. So one thing I do want to say is, we could just apply the Posterize Time effect to the layers themselves. So if I grab the old Posterize Time and I say apply it to piece 1, that's the white piece here, and we play this through, if I just go ahead and, I've already put a Posterize Time on it. That's fun. So I'm gonna posterize just this layer. And you can see, hopefully, how it is behaving differently from the others. So let's play this through. There we go. That's a bit more. It's all the way down to 4. And you can see that layer has been posterized, right? That one is behaving differently from the others. So you might think that the thing to do sometimes is to drop Posterize Time on whatever layer. Well, sometimes this will work. Sometimes it will give you much consternation. That's right. I'm still trying to be alliterative with the title of our episode. So here I've got a couple of examples of that. We've got these two images, right? I'll just toggle off their effects here real quick. And they are rotating, right? They are just rotating along, having a little bit of a tilt, right? Now, from their effects on this one, this yellow one, I'm going to posterize it down to 4, and I'm going to tint it yellow so we can tell. The pink one made pink, and we're going to posterize that one down to 4. Let's see how that goes. Bee-boo-boo-boo. Ugh. Imagine the letdown. The only type of thing I can compare it to is thinking that you're slaying a dragon and instead you're impaling a large piece of agricultural equipment. So why is this happening, right? Well, we're posterizing the contents of the object, not the keyframes on that object itself. Those are not being affected. If we wanted the layer itself to be affected in its movements, we need to collapse its transformations. Now, I can do that on one of them because I pre-composed it. You can select any object, Command-Shift-C, pre-compose that bad boy, and that will give you the option of collapsing its transformations. And you can see with that little change, this one is now clicking along like a clock, and the other one is still, I can't think of any other C words to go with smoothly. Anyway, so there we go. If you want these things to be ticking, you need to continuously rasterize them. Now, why does it work in this example here? Well, because shape layers are always continuously rasterizing. They are constantly continuously rasterized, and therefore they may be posterized. So if the mnemonic of rasterize and posterize, you know that they go together because they rhyme. I don't know if any of these ideas are helping people. But
they can let us know.
Yeah, let us know in the chat if this is helping. Oh, Kyle, I can see from the viewing numbers it is not. So one thing I wanted to show though is there is another way to posterize. Now, Kyle, you actually turned me on to this method that I would not have otherwise used, I don't think, because I'm not often kind of mixing and matching, but here we've got this thing and its various movements are posterized at different rates. Now, how do we achieve such a thing? Well, I'm just going to...
Magic?
That's right, the power of magic and friendship. And if I just tap the U key twice here, we're going to bring up everything that has been modified about this particular object. So piece one again. And I've applied a little expression to each of the things that has keyframe changes. And I'm saying posterize time and then giving it a value within the parentheses. So what we're doing is we are posterizing the actual change of this value over time. We're saying, hey expression, I'm going to need for you to get posterized. So whatever goes on in here, posterize that. And the thing that is going on is we are just looking at the value or whatever is going to be returned here from the keyframes or whatever has been written in. Now, if you click the little show post expression graph, and then we venture on over to the graph editor, you're going to see here a nice smooth curve and then the stairs, that quantized stairs. And that is the post expression sort of operation that's happening, turning the smooth into the stairs. And you can see here on this rotation, let's go ahead and show you the stairs on that, because it has been posterized at a different frame rate. And yeah, hopefully that kind of makes sense with how this is particularly working. So if you need to posterize a particular value change, you can posterize it using an expression. That's a bit of an advanced move, but I believe, Kyle, that move could become even more advanced.
It can, yeah. I took that idea even further. Something that I have done a lot on this style of project. You may have noticed from my example that a lot of things were wiggling, which I think brings a nice sort of poppy life to everything. You can see like the windmill here, for example, has a little bit of just sort of a chunky movement to it. And then like these circle chunks, they all move into place, but then they're wiggling around. The text, same thing. So it's using that same idea plus a little bit more. So let me just kind of isolate a few things here. And one of the reasons I like using that expression that Evan just showed, like I have right here on my mountains, because you can still work in, I'm working at 24 frames a second here. You can still make your keyframes and be kind of as precise as you want, but then have it displayed at this lower frame rate. And you can have, in this case, I could be working another property at a different frame rate if I wanted to. That would probably get, chaotic pretty quickly, but you do have that opportunity if you want very chunky position moves, but then a smooth scale, for example. So just like Evan showed, you can posterize one property that way. And then on some of these, they didn't need to be animated. So like this windmill, it just has this kind of posterized wiggle. Most people are pretty well aware of the wiggle expression. You type wiggle, and then the first number is how often you want it to wiggle, and the second number is how much. And then you can use that same posterized time expression right above that. And so it doesn't matter. I could have put 2 right here as well. I just kind of typed 12 for, I don't know, whatever reason. But it's only ever going to show us 2 per second of those wiggles. And so you get this very chunky kind of, pop around sort of movement. But what if I want to combine those two? And I know that this is getting a little expression-y here, but I just want you to kind of think through the way that I approach this. So if I'm posterizing my wiggle at a very low frame rate, and I want to be able to move the thing at a posterized but faster than the wiggle frame rate, this was the solution I came up with. And let me just kind of isolate a few pieces here, get rid of some of the other ones I've isolated. This is one of the chunks of the circle here. And what you're actually seeing is a texture that's applied to it, but the movement is coming from the actual circle piece, okay? So you can see it moves into place at the beginning here with kind of a chunky posterized move, and then it wiggles around at 2 frames per second. And so what I'm doing is actually that same just posterized time value, and then I said plus, and I had created my expression is going to break for a second. I'm using what's called an expression control, and I just have a little point control that I added to the layer, and then that's set to 0, 0, and then that has its own wiggle expression like I showed you on the layer above. So this little point is wiggling around if you look at these red values right here. And then I told the layer itself to posterize whatever value I give you, meaning those keyframes, plus whatever that point makes. And so now I can posterize the actual keyframes at one rate and then just add that chunky wiggle to that as well.
Science rule.
Yeah, and definitely there would be a way to write all of this in one expression, but I think this is a little more adjustable and seemed like a better way to explain it too. So you can kind of separate those two things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So with that in mind, Kyle, I think we've zoomed in on this thing. Let us zoom back out. I've got another thing that I want to show the good people here. So in these kind of larger elements, we would say, right? These kind of larger narrative pieces, we're trying to explain something, we're trying to show a process, we're trying to convey a narrative, but we're still doing it fairly abstractly in some way. Well, this is where we tend to need to navigate over large spans of space, or we need to go somewhere, we need to transition from one place to another. There's a lot of examples of why we need to do this. Here's one with a map, right? And we're zooming into Madrid. Now we're going to go to the islands out in the Mediterranean, and we'll just kind of repeat the process because it's on a loop. We get this question in many forms in many ways. So if you have asked a similar question to this, hopefully this will happen for you. But here's how to fairly quickly produce a map that you can navigate around in After Effects. So the thing you want to do is actually create first, a large object. And in this case, this is a 3000 by 3000 pixel composition full of the actual map itself. So this object, right, is big. This is a big thing. And it's full of all the detail that we're going to zoom in on. So later we might get really close to this, or we'll get far from it, or we'll pan over it. But we're creating a big thing that we can move around. And that's the important part that I want to stress here is how do we use this? Well, step one, make sure that your duration of this, in this case, is 15 seconds, and it's long enough to cover whatever we're going to be doing with it. Then we create a new composition. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new one of those. Maybe it's 1080 by 1080, smaller than that original. Frame rate at 30, that's pretty good. And I'm just going to call this use. And we are going to probably turn off our proportional grid. And then I'm going to take that map, that original map, and plomp it down in here. Ooh, it's too big. Well, the thing I'm going to do is make it three-dimensional. And then I'm going to make a new camera. And this will allow me, maybe use a 50 millimeter preset. This will allow me to simply move around the scene, changing my view of this object as much as I would like. Right? So we are going to go from being over here. And now I'm going to call up the position of the camera, set a position change, move forward a bit, use my camera controls, toggling through by hitting C, holding down Shift and sliding over like this. I'm going to ease that last keyframe. So we're coming over to the map. Now I'm going to go ahead and ease things like this so it's moving in a little bit quicker. And then we'll hang out for a little bit. Good to hang out when you're in Spain. And now we will simply move ahead a bit and we will zoom in. So we're going to use our camera controls, pushing into where we want to go, pushing into the things that we want to observe. And there we go. Now we are whoosh, moving into this part of the map. So it's critical to be kind of thinking about this just as we would a real object, right? We're just going to take the map. We're going to look at this part of the map. We're going to move into this part of the map. We're going to move out and over and down. And that's how we get around these things. It's not really much of an illusion, right? We're just creating the object, navigating around it with a camera. It all remains feeling pretty two-dimensional, and that's because we're not doing anything particularly parallaxy about it. We're not putting anything in depth around it. But because we are able to modify our view of the thing, instead of the alternative would be to try to take this element here, and then we are going to change its like position, its scale, its rotation maybe. You know, we have to set so many other keyframes on this element, and maybe we are just going to say shrink it down, move it over, like that. So
I feel like the biggest thing you'd run into is that if you start zoomed into one area and then want to move and zoom in somewhere else, you're kind of dealing with two different anchor points now,
yeah,
and that's a little trickier to
and
track
that
down.
feeling of like, whoa, the world is sliding underneath me. That's the thing that I like to avoid. Now, if that is something you want to have happen, you can definitely do it. But I urge you, try out the 3D camera. It's not as terrifying as it sounds, and it will give you these sorts of easy transitions into and out of different things. Now, this scene, right, is a map. Let me show you the exact same technique used on a timeline. So here, the same thing. Giant timeline. Maybe these would all be like little events or little pictures you could put across all of those. It is a very long thing. It is 6,000 pixels long by 1,000 pixels. And maybe these things are animating in some way as we're moving over them. But the timeline in use is done exactly the same. We're going to move from 1970, pulling back 1990, and then maybe we are going to proceed forward to another time, right? It's all the same thing. One big thing, one camera to move over the big thing, and there we go. So, also, we're getting our 10-minute warning. Kyle, do you have anything that you can quickly show these people?
Absolutely. So I think I can get into some of my texturing that I did here because that uses the new track map functionality, as well as my paper cutout circle. I did want to address a question from Peter real quick, asking about if it's possible to get the exercise files. I will say that my project is built with a few licensed elements from Adobe stock, so I wouldn't be able to distribute mine in this case. But and I don't know about yours. You can speak to yours. That is something that we are going to endeavor to do when it's possible. Yes. But it won't always be possible because sometimes we need elements to be able to showcase what we're doing.
Ooh. And of course, I'm just going to keep coughing into the microphone. But make sure that you follow Kyle and I on Twitter and Instagram, and we will be posting up any kind of updates to this kind of thing. And I believe that we can actually append files to this, so watch out for my files at least showing up in this space. So anyway, Kyle, with our dying moments of sunlight.
Okay. So I have a lot of textures going on in this project. I'll just kind of play it one more time here so you can kind of see. And some of them move with the objects that they're attached to, and some of them have their own poppy, posterized wiggle that you've already seen how we built that. In addition to being parented to the thing, let's kind of zoom out of here and just see. Let's take a look at my circles. I can just very quickly show you. I made two circles. I tore them different ways so I'd have some variety. I used a flatbed scanner, as I think someone referenced earlier in the chat, because I still have one of those and recommend having one for this kind of stuff if you can get your hands on one. So let me just kind of isolate these circles. I think those are a good example here. When you get close, you can see that these all have textures and they're actually slightly different things. But it's actually all, let me see if I just do this. It's actually all the same photo, which is of this same region of the world. And I just sort of zoomed into different areas of this photo to kind of give different textures on the different pieces of this. And then
Kyle, I love this economical use. License one photo, use it 100 different ways.
Yeah, exactly. And then actually the mid-ground of our mountains is using the same thing here. Hang on, one more. There we go. Is using that same photo again. So just taking advantage of that in several different ways. So you can see it's kind of just stuck onto my very roughly cut out landscape, which the landscape elements, where am I going? Back to After Effects. The landscape elements in general, the mountains and such, these are actually just traced from that same photo into just simple shape layers, so I kind of have the shapes. But let's take a look at the way that these are applied, because I'm taking advantage of the track mats here. These circles are actually all just those little pieces of paper. And if you look at last week, you'll see something that we did, which was setting up a drop-down menu. And that, to me, seemed like the best way to kind of set all these up in one place. Remember how I set up the horse so they all kind of overlapped? I did the same thing here. So these would actually I made myself a reference circle and placed them all so that I could like rotate them easily, right? And then I made myself a little drop-down control so I could easily choose which piece I was dealing with. So these are each kind of using that same idea there. And then each piece of the circle is just kind of placed so that I'd sort of have, the complete thing, and they're overlapping a bit. And then I brought in that landscape picture. Here we go. I've got too much stuff on top of this. There's that picture. And I wanted this one to be over a specific chunk of the circle. So I certainly could have done some of this inside pre-compositions or something. It might be a little easier to keep track of things then, but I wanted this flexibility. And so in this case, what I did is I took this landscape, and using this new track matte column, which has evolved a little bit from older ways, you can just pick whip something to the layer that you want to use as the matte. And I am using this in a slightly different way than you used to be able to, because this layer is now sitting on top of the layer it's using as a matte, although it doesn't really matter too much in this case. It could have been the other way around.
Look, these are the fun new things with the new track matte system. They can be anywhere. They can be anywhere.
They can be anywhere. These circles could live like way at the bottom of the composition now if I wanted.
That's true.
And then there's just some, some levels and some coloring here, variations of that on each of the circle pieces. And that way they just all kind of have like a little bit of their own style, and they're parented to the circles so that, you got that wiggly poppy wiggle that you were looking at earlier. And pretty much every layer in here has some variation of that idea.
Right.
And rather than burying all those in their own pre-compositions, which again is totally valid, I just wanted to be able to kind of move them around and adjust them easily directly in here.
Now, Kyle, speaking of variations on a theme, I know we only have like 3 minutes left, so check this out.
Yep.
I want to show really quickly some repeater ripples that you can do. These lovely little embellishments that you can create. Here we have 4 examples. Now, all we've done with these is we start with a circle. So let's go to the most basic version of this. We start by creating an ellipse, right? And then we add to that an offset paths, and then we add to that a wiggle transform. So what does that look like if we start it from scratch? Well, we start with our ellipse. Here we have this wonderful pink ellipse, right? Then we add to that, we're going to add using a little drop down here, an offset paths. We are offsetting that paths. How many copies would we like? A bunch. Give me 5, please. And I will just shrink down the actual size. We will increase the actual amount they're being pushed away. That's looking good so far. I'm going to take that layer. No, go back. We're going to take that layer and we are going to shrink it down to look a little bit more like ripples. And if we want to mess with these things, we want to add to that what is called a wiggle transform. We go into the wiggle transform, and you're going to see that we can choose within the transform of the wiggle transform what we want to be changed about this. Let's unlink these buddies. Let's go 10 and 20 across like this, and you can see that they are now undulating. And then you can use all those various things we've covered to posterize those. Hoo-wee, Kyle. We got to all of the things.
Quick question from Sabrand. I think he's asking about when you are matting like that. You can use anything. You can matte anything with any other layer, and you can matte any layer with any other layer. It's not stackable per se, but you can use one layer to matte multiple layers. It's much more versatile than it used to be.
Indeed. And of course, I will endeavor to make these files available, so if you want to pick them apart, you can do that. We're coming into the end of the show, but the fun doesn't stop here. You can come and join us over on Twitch, so twitch.tv/Adobe. Cody Bear is going to be hanging out over there, spending some time with you, getting creative, getting wacky. Things are strange on the Twitch channel, but you can also follow Adobe Live on Instagram. Lots of wacky things happening over there. Kyle, where can people find you on the internet?
The easiest place to find me is at my own website, kylehamrick.com. That can then point you to the various social media sites.
You can find me around the internet at EC Abrams. That's ECABRAMS. I forgot how to spell my own last name. You can, you can find us both here on BHits, but you will especially find us in 2 weeks, where we will return to you with more wisdom derived from your very own questions. So please use that form. Send us your questions on Twitter. You can just tweet at us, get at us on Instagram, message us directly here on Behance. We want your questions. We crave them so that we can convert them into your cranium contents.
Stuff.
Yeah. I got there, Kyle. So ends the show. Thanks for being with us. We will see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.